After decades of dispute, Britain agrees to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, but not without controversy. In exchange, the US and UK secure a 99-year lease on one of the world's most strategic military bases. Chagossians call it betrayal. Courts intervened, but the deal is now signed. It's a victory for some, a heartbreak for others, a new chapter in the long shadow of colonialism.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about this remote island chain. Beautiful place, picture perfect, but it's tangled up in this really complex knot of history, international disputes, and, well, high-stakes military strategy.
Right. And it's not just some obscure story happening far away. It's actually a really important case study.
Exactly. It touches on decolonization, international law, human rights, stuff that's, pretty vital for understanding how the world works today. Especially relevant if you're tracking global affairs closely.
And it's very current because of this major agreement that's just been reached concerning the Chagos Islands. It involves the UK, Mauritius, and also the US has a big stake in it.
Yeah, definitely. So we've gathered our source material, mainly drawing from recent BBC reporting on this development. And our mission today in this deep dive is basically to cut through that complexity. We want to look at the history, how we got here, the actual details of this new deal, the different perspectives, and importantly, the people directly impacted, and try to figure out what it all really means.
Think of it as, well, getting you properly informed on a pretty critical global issue. It covers these big themes: sovereignty versus strategy, colonialism's legacy, the fight for justice for displaced people. These things echo way beyond just these islands.
Okay, so let's jump right into the main event then. The deal itself, the one that was just announced.
Right. The headline news is the UK has agreed to actually return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Sovereignty is being handed over.
And this was formally done, signed and sealed.
Yes, signed by the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Nevin Ramgoolam. And the US, well, they were definitely paying attention.
I bet. What was their take?
Their Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, called it a historic agreement. And you can see why from their angle it specifically secures the future of that incredibly important military base they operate there.
Right. So that's the core trade-off, isn't it? Mauritius gets the islands back, legally speaking.
Yes, sovereignty.
But in return, the UK and the US get to keep using the joint military facility on Diego Garcia, which is the biggest island.
Precisely. And the source material lays out the financials pretty clearly. The UK is going to pay Mauritius $101 million every year to lease the base facility.
Wow, $101 million a year. For how long?
For 99 years. And Starmer himself pointed out, according to the source, that if you factor in inflation over almost a century, the total net cost is estimated at around $3.4 billion.
3.4 billion pounds. That's quite a commitment. What was the UK's justification for that level of spending, Starmer's rationale?
Well, according to the reporting, he was quite direct about it. He called this deal the only way they could guarantee continued access to the base for both Britain and America. He framed it very much as being in Britain's national interest.
Okay, so for the UK, national interest, strategic access, that was the priority. What about Mauritius? How did Prime Minister Ramgoolam frame it?
He hailed it as a great victory and specifically said it completes the process of decolonization for Mauritius. You have to remember, they gained independence back in '68, but without these islands.
Right, so for them, it's closing that chapter. It feels like a very pragmatic deal then. Sovereignty from Mauritius, guaranteed access for the UK and US.
Seems that way. And it's interesting, Starmer also mentioned that the then U.S. President Donald Trump actually supported this agreement. That's according to the reporting anyway.
Which just underlines how important this base is to the U.S. across different administrations, really.
Absolutely. It shows that enduring strategic interest. So let's talk about why Diego Garcia is so vital. What makes this particular base worth potentially 3.4 billion pounds over the long run?
Good question. Because it's not just any old airstrip, is it? The sources make it really clear its strategic value is, well, immense. And it has been for decades.
It was crucial during the Cold War. Its position in the Indian Ocean meant it was perfect for keeping tabs on the Soviet Navy and general activity in Asia.
And it didn't stay static, right? It grew.
Significantly. Especially after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, it was expanded to project power more effectively into the Middle East and that wider region.
And more recently, people might know the name from?
From its role as a major staging outpost, yeah. For U.S. bombing campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, it played a key part in those conflicts.
So different eras, different conflicts, but that location just keeps being strategically critical.
Exactly. And the official U.S. line, voiced by Secretary Rubio, is that the base is critical to regional and global security. This agreement, from their perspective, ensures its long-term, stable, and effective operation.
You look at it on a map, smack bang in the middle of the Indian Ocean, sort of equidistant from Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. You can see the military logic. Securing it for 99 years makes sense from that viewpoint?
Definitely. But, this deal and the base's importance, that's really only part of the story. There's this whole other layer, a much deeper history involving displacement and, frankly, injustice.
We absolutely have to go there to understand why Mauritius even had a claim and why people had to be, well, removed for that base to be built.
Okay, let's rewind. So the islands, originally colonized by France, 18th century. Then they were ceded to Britain in 1814. And later, in 1903, they were administratively merged with the colony of Mauritius.
Okay, so they were part of Mauritius under British rule, but then came the crucial step, just before Mauritian independence.
Yes, 1965, Britain basically detached the Chagos Islands from Mauritius, a unilateral move just before granting independence.
And they paid Mauritius for them.
They did, £3 million at the time. Our source notes that's roughly equivalent to about $50 million today. Not a huge sum, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things.
So Mauritius becomes independent in 1968, but these islands are suddenly no longer part of its territory. They were renamed, weren't they?
That's right, renamed the British Indian Ocean Territory, BIOT.
And almost straight away, Britain makes a deal with the U.S.
Yes, in 1966, even before Mauritian independence was finalized, Britain leased the islands, the BIOT, to the United States, specifically to build a military base. That first lease was for 50 years.
Which was later extended.
Correct, later extended up to 2036.
Okay, so the stage is set. Britain detaches the islands, leases them to the U.S., and then comes the human cost.
Yeah, this is the really grim part. Between 1968 and 1973, the entire population of the Chagos Islands, about 2,000 people, the Chagossians, who had lived there for generations, they were forcibly expelled, kicked out of their homes to make way for the base.
And the way it was described at the time, it's quite disturbing.
It really is. The source material quotes a British diplomatic cable from that era. It describes the removal of these people in just awful, dehumanizing terms, referring to them as a few Tarzans and Man Fridays.
Unbelievable. That language just speaks volumes about the mindset back then. Where were these people sent?
Most were shipped off, essentially dumped, in Mauritius and the Seychelles, often with very little support.
And Mauritius protested this whole thing from the start.
Absolutely. From the moment it gained independence, Mauritius argued that Britain breaking up its territory like that right before independence was illegal under international law. They consistently demanded the islands back and insisted on the right of the exiled islanders to return.
So that kicked off a long, long fight. Decades of struggle.
On multiple fronts, yeah. Legal challenges, international pressure. The islanders themselves started legal action in Mauritius way back in 1975.
Did that lead anywhere initially?
It resulted in a settlement in 1982, about £4 million in compensation, plus some land valued at £1 million, but specifically for those islanders who ended up in Mauritius.
So not everyone benefited.
No, a key detail the source points out is that the Chagossians who'd been sent to the Seychelles, they got nothing from that particular deal. So divisions were created even then.
And there were court cases in the UK too, right? I seem to remember some ups and downs there.
There were. A big moment of hope came in 2007. A UK appeals court actually ruled that the Chagossians should be allowed to return.
Wow, that must have felt like a breakthrough.
Huge. But it didn't last. The House of Lords, which was the UK's highest court back then, overturned that decision just a year later, in 2008.
So hope dashed. And the official UK government line remained opposed to resettlement.
Yes, they formally confirmed that again in 2016, citing defense, security needs, and also the cost of resettlement as reasons why it couldn't happen.
Okay, now what about this marine protected area? That sounds positive, but it was controversial.
Very controversial. In 2010, the UK declared this massive marine protected area an MPA around the islands.
Environmentally good, you'd think.
Well, that was the public justification. But later, diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks revealed something else. They quoted a British official basically admitting the MPA plan was designed to, and I quote, put paid to the resettlement claims.
So use environmental protection as a cover to legally block people from returning.
That was certainly the accusation, and how it was widely interpreted. It was seen as a cynical move to make resettlement practically impossible by designating the area as off-limits for human habitation.
Did that stand up legally?
No, it didn't. A UN arbitration tribunal looked into it and in 2015 declared the MPA illegal. They found it violated Britain's prior legal obligations towards Mauritius, essentially.
Okay, so that move failed. Then came the really big international judgment, right? The ICJ.
Yes, 2019. A landmark moment. The International Court of Justice, the UN's top court, issued an advisory opinion.
And what did the ICJ say?
It was pretty unambiguous. They stated that Britain's separation of the islands from Mauritius back in 1965 was unlawful, and that the UK was under an obligation to end its administration of the islands as rapidly as possible, basically give them back.
A clear ruling from the highest international court. But Britain didn't just accept it.
No, they rejected it. The UK government argued that it was an advisory opinion, not legally binding in the same way as a contentious case ruling. They also argued Mauritius was wrong to bring the case and, again, stressed the vital role of the Diego Garcia base.
So defiance in the face of international legal opinion.
Pretty much, but the international pressure didn't let up. Later that same year, 2019, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for a resolution demanding Britain comply with the ICJ opinion and cede the islands. It showed a really strong global consensus against the UK's position.
So where does that leave the Chagossians today? Before this new deal, I mean.
Well, the community, estimated around 10,000 people now, including descendants, remains scattered, mainly in Mauritius, the Seychelles, and also many had moved to the UK. Still displaced, still fighting for recognition and return.
Which brings us right back to the signing of this latest deal. And apparently, it wasn't entirely smooth sailing on the day itself. There was some last-minute drama.
There was, yeah. Right on the day the virtual signing ceremony was meant to happen, there was a legal challenge launched in London's High Court.
By whom?
By two Chagossian women, Beatrice Pompey and Bernadette Dudas. They were trying to get an injunction to block the deal from being signed.
And did they succeed? Even briefly?
They did, temporarily. They actually won an interim injunction, which must have caused a bit of a panic.
Put a spanner in the works, yeah. What happened then?
The UK government immediately challenged that injunction. Their lawyers rushed to court, arguing the deal absolutely had to be signed by 1 p.m. that day. They really pushed the urgency angle.
High-pressure situation. What did the judge decide?
Just after 12:30 p.m., so really close to that deadline, Judge Martin Chamberlain lifted the injunction. He sided with the government.
On what grounds?
He ruled there was a very strong case that keeping the ban in place would harm the UK's national and public interests. Essentially, the strategic imperative won out in that specific legal moment. He did say any further appeals would have to go to the Court of Appeal.
So the deal went through. But this challenge and the judge's reasoning focusing on UK interests really highlights another crucial perspective we have to talk about.
Absolutely. The voices of the Chagossians themselves, particularly those who don't feel represented by this UK-Mauritius agreement.
Yes. What did Beatrice Pompey, one of the women who brought the challenge, say afterwards?
She spoke outside the court, and the source quotes her calling it a very, very sad day.
Understandable. Did she say anything else?
She made a really powerful statement that cuts right to the heart of the complexity here. She said, and this is a direct quote, "We don't want to hand our rights over to Mauritius. We are not Mauritians."
Wow. That says so much, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It underlines that for at least some Chagossians, this isn't just about ending British control. It's about their own identity, their own rights, maybe their desire for self-determination or a specific form of return, separate from just becoming part of Mauritius.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer. It's not just a bilateral issue between London and Port Louis. There's a distinct Chagossian perspective, and it seems this deal doesn't necessarily satisfy everyone within that community.
It's a stark reminder that colonial legacies, forced displacement. These things are never neat. They create these incredibly complex situations with multiple layers of identity, rights, and desires.
Absolutely. And in this case, the Chagos story, it really encapsulates all of that. You've got the colonial history, the strategic military imperatives, the evolution of international law, the raw human tragedy of the expulsion, and these ongoing questions about justice and rights that linger even after this deal.
Which is precisely why digging into this specific case is so valuable for, anyone trying to understand global politics, whether you're just keeping informed or perhaps even studying these themes for something like the UPSC exams, where international relations, decolonization, human rights law, these are core topics. This isn't just abstract theory, it's a real-world example.
It really drives home how past actions cast long shadows, creating these intricate geopolitical and human situations that take decades or even centuries to try and resolve, if they ever fully are.
So let's try and sum up. The deal is done. The UK secures the base for the long term, paying Mauritius a hefty sum. Mauritius regains sovereignty, fulfilling a long-standing national goal. But the final thought, the provocative question maybe for you, our listeners, to mull over is this. Does this agreement, brokered between the UK and Mauritius, primarily around strategic and sovereign interests, truly deliver justice for the original sin, the forced displacement of the Chagossian people? And does it actually address the specific wishes, the distinct identity of those islanders who, like Bertrice Pompey said, feel they are not Mauritians and don't want their rights handed over?
That's the lingering question, isn't it? What happens next for the Chagossian community itself?
Something to keep an eye on. Now, if this deep dive into the Chagos Islands situation has raised more questions for you, or if you have thoughts you want to share, please do leave a comment below. We'd genuinely love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you found this discussion helpful or informative, maybe consider giving us a like and definitely subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into complex global stories like this one.
And just to reiterate, all the information we've discussed today, the facts and quotes, they're drawn directly from detailed reporting on this topic by the BBC.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.